Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV World. In today's show, we will be taking a look at the number of developments that have taken place today in the aftermath, of course, of what has been going on in the country in the past couple of days or so. We knew that the PDM chief was speaking about staging a protest sit-in outside the Supreme Court against the order of the Chief Justice was given relief to the former Prime Minister and PTI Chairman Imran Khan, and of course has been under a lot of criticism recently with the orders regarding the elections in Punjab, and then of course with regards to the many cases pertaining to the PTI chief. But particularly since his arrest, we have seen a lot of controversy and debate around the Supreme Court's role in this whole situation, and of course the benches and the Chief Justice has been criticized for being partial towards the PTI chief, which is why the protest stage in was outside the Supreme Court today, and a large number of people of course had gathered there to protest against this decision. Speaking on the occasion, the PDM chief also spoke about how the apex court is something that he completely respects, and the rule of law is something that the entire PDM speaks about, but it's important that the decisions of the court are not partial, and that the way that the decisions regarding particularly the constitution and various political parties are held within the courts are there in terms of impartiality, and that justice can be expected. We also know that in the announcement, the PDM chief has also called off the protest sit-in that he had earlier planned, speaking again about the courts playing their role and making sure that whatever goes on in the country, that there is justice and that strict action is taken. We also know that the Parliament has also spoken with regards to the kind of violence that we have seen in the country following the arrest of the PTI chairman earlier, and the kind of ruckus that was there with targeted buildings of state institutions and public property, and this is of course something that is very, very serious, and the resolution passed by the Parliament also speaks about this particular issue and the fact that the sacrifices rendered by our armed forces are immense, and this is something that everyone respects and need to remember the sanctity of the institutions as we proceed. We also know that the ISPR separately has also spoken about the protesters being tried under the Military Act, and we're going to see whether or not that actually also takes place with regards to the kind of accountability that everyone is talking about as to what is happening. At the same time, we know that the PTI chairman seems to be disowning any of the people involved within these miscreants, and says that his party workers are not part of it. But of course, it remains to be seen what's going to happen under the investigation, and no one is absolved of the responsibility. But in terms of where the political dynamics are going, we also know that the hearing of the ECP's plea petition was also conducted today with regards to, of course, the Supreme Court's earlier order of May 14th for elections to be held in Punjab, and the deadline passing just yesterday, which of course also was a point of a lot of debate among the different political parties. And we saw that in the aftermath of that, the questions raised by the ECP regarding the court's jurisdictions on the matters were talked about in the hearing today. And the CJP again spoke about the political dialogue among the political parties, and emphasized again and again on the need for peace in the country, and the fact that the opposition and the ruling parties need to sit together and talk. Again, something that we'll talk about further in the show today as to why is this conversation happening in the courts, but exactly what this means in terms of the current scenario, and then of course the legal cases pertaining to the PTI chairman and the political situation in the country, we'll be discussing more in further detail. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi. We've also been joined in the studios by Senator PML-N, Rana, Maqbool, Ahmad. Thank you very much for joining us in the studios. We've also been joined online by Barrister Shabbir, Shah, who's a legal expert. Thank you very much, Barrister Shabbir, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Let me start with you, Rana Saab. We know, of course, that the PDM chief had talked about a protest sit-in, and of course, there were a lot of discussions with regards to the venue earlier as well, but he was adamant that this needs to be done the way that he had planned to. And we, of course, also saw a large number of people gather outside the Supreme Court. But in terms of the kind of objectives, perhaps, or aims there were behind this protest sit-in, and what the PDM wanted to achieve, do you think that that has been done today?
Thank you, sir. I'm very grateful. And my respect for Pitafi Sahab due to his high intellect.
Of course.
Situation has been very grave, unfortunately, and we're very unlucky to have such a situation where the politicians are protesting against the Chief Justice of Pakistan, who is the main pillar and the main ambassador of justice, equity and equilibrium. The situation got aggravated because once you see the latest agitation which was carried out by the PTI, there is a main component of terrorism. You might remember the Taliban strategy and methodology of terrorism was they used to target the military installations. If they attacked GHQ, when General Kiani was the army chief, they attacked the GHQ again. And if they have been attacking the military installations, today they attacked the military installations. They have been burning schools, the Taliban. These people also burnt schools. And the way they burned the relics of the Qaed, and more so the gruesome act which was committed to pick up the statue of the great martyr like Colonel Shah, who fought single-handedly for 7 days against the enemies and gave his life. One could be proud of such a martyr. They broke that statue, which is a symbol of great holiness for us, for all practical purposes, because Shaheed is a holy soul. So they cut the throat of the statue. This is what they have been doing. They have been cutting the throat of the army Jawans. So the modalities are common. So this is the most worrisome feature of this agitation. And the way they ransacked the Corps Commander House, which was once a abode of the father of the nation. So all these factors put together, they were actually source of great worry for all the politicians. And once the man who is mainly leading this total campaign, he is being patronized and he is being encouraged and protected by as senior a man as chief of the justice machinery. So once this feeling is there that he is being protected by the chief of the justice machinery, so there had to be a great reaction. I personally think reaction is not proportionate to the acts, but somehow or other they have protested, but very peacefully protested. They have conveyed the message. Along with today's resolution in the National Assembly by a lady MNA Shahida Somro, that calling for a committee, constituting a committee to investigate and file a reference against the Honorable Chief Justice, unfortunately. And this is a pity in our relationship, the people with the judiciary. I personally think the Honorable Judge should rise to the occasion. He should change his models immediately. He should start following Cornelius or Rana Bhagwan Das. He should forget about following Justice Munir, etc. It's not, he will be destroying himself, his image. And the world hereafter he'll be questioned again because it's a national issue. Why should we do like this? People are remembered for their deeds or misdeeds. Why do we adore Cornelius today? And why do we condemn Justice Munir and others like Irshad Hasan Khan, like Mr. Saqib Nisar? Why do we adore Rana Bhagwan Das? Because they were very just, they were very fair. So they should now try to analyze what they have done, and I personally think and pray that things end peacefully.
All right.
Otherwise, the culmination of this total crusade by the politicians against the Chief Judge will not be a very welcoming conclusion.
Right, absolutely. And I'd like to speak to you a bit more about that also, but I'll come back to that. Barrister Shabbir, with regards to the hearing, of course, of the ECP's plea petition, it's important because the deadline of 14th May just passed yesterday, and there was a point of a lot of discussion with regards to political parties and the dialogue, which was again referred in the courts today as well. And it seemed that the CJP was emphasizing a lot for the political parties to proceed with negotiations and for dialogue to occur. And he even talked about how the ball is in the court of the government and that they need to make sure that this negotiation process actually takes place. Do you think there's anything odd about this?
Thank you, Sana. I don't think there's anything odd about it. If at all, the ball was always, this was always the political thicket doctrine that I'd mentioned previously. It is always within the domain of the parliament to decide its own issues. Therefore, the solution always is going to be a political solution, whether through violence or without violence. The solution is always going to be a political solution. Now, if you allow me, I wanted to make a comment on Rana Maqbool Saab's point, which he had mentioned in respect of the parliamentary proceedings today. The parliament today has resolved or perhaps constituted a committee for moving a reference against the Honorable Chief Justice of Pakistan. It is important that before there is any uncertainty, we shed some light on what is the law and what effect would it be of. So, if you allow me, the Article 209 of the Constitution constitutes Supreme Judicial Council, and only the Supreme Judicial Council can inquire against a conduct of a judge of the Superior Court, either on its own motion or if the President has sent a reference to the Supreme Judicial Council. Now, a very interesting question could arise that what would be the effect of a parliamentary resolution even if it is passed. I am of the opinion that such resolution, legally speaking, morally of course it will be of great significance, but legally speaking it will be like an ordinary complaint if I, yourself or Rana Saab were to file a complaint against the Honorable Chief Justice. It would not have a binding force which will compel the Supreme Judicial Council to look into such matter. Obviously, if the President were to send a reference, and here the President is completely independent and he is not bound to act on the advice of the Prime Minister or the Cabinet in this case. Therefore, there are two aspects which are very important. One is that if the resolution is passed, the Supreme Judicial Council can still decide not to inquire into the matter. Number two, because politically it is also the moral obligation of the Supreme Judicial Council that if the Parliament has sent a reference or a complaint, then it should be inquired into. And in that situation, the interesting point would be that the Honorable Chief Justice would not be part of Supreme Judicial Council. The other members and obviously the senior puisne judge, Honorable Justice Qazi Faiz Isa, would in that case hear such a complaint if the Supreme Judicial Council decides to inquire into the matter. But as yet,
yes. What you're saying possibly is that the Supreme Judicial Council can also decide not to take up the matter. Is there going to be any specific reason for that?
No, I have a different viewpoint.
Right, and I'll come to you, Ransa.
Okay.
Yes, Barrister Shabbir, can you also clarify the reasons for that? What reasons need to be there for the...
You see, Article 209 of the Constitution empowers the Supreme Judicial Council on its own and also the President. If the President sends the matter like the President had sent in Justice Faiz Isa's case, the Supreme Judicial Council had no other authority but to inquire. Obviously, then the Supreme Court itself was approached. But here, like you said precisely, obviously, in this case, if the Parliament has sent a reference, in my opinion also, it would be obligatory morally on the Supreme Judicial Council, but it is not binding. It is not binding. It may still decide. It would be one of the complaints. At the moment, there are 100 complaints. 100 complaints pending before the Supreme Judicial Council. It's up to them whether to take it or not.
All right. Farrukh, with regards to the situation, of course, specifically with the reference also, but in broader terms, the way that we're proceeding with the issues between the judiciary and the parliament, of course, very openly and clearly the parliamentarians, even today in the sit-in and the parliament, also have expressed their displeasure over the kind of decisions that have been coming in from the Supreme Court, their mistrust with regards to the decision and the fact that the decisions are not impartial. And it's important because it's not the first time that the Parliament is talking about this and speaking with regards to the Chief Justice and the bench. But in terms of where we stand today, it also seems that at the same time, the same bench is still proceeding with, for example, the ECP's plea petition as well. And that sort of legal process is still being followed. And again, in the speeches today, we also heard about how the CJP is expected, again, to recourse himself and to follow the rule of law and be impartial. How are these things going to be aligned if there is such a trust deficit? Then why is the same expectation then from the same individual who we're questioning?
Right, Sana, a very comprehensive question, and based on what was said earlier, many moving parts, right? First of all, regarding Supreme Judicial Council, especially because Barrister Saab and Senator Saab both were talking about it, let me say that when 18th Amendment was being passed, I repeatedly kept on advocating that the matter of appointment of judges should have a parliamentary oversight, and which should be an effective one, right? Similarly, that committee system is very strong in Pakistan, but it doesn't have the subpoena powers. So subpoena powers should also be there with some kind of punitive capability. That's how you actually create the kind of checks and balances in the system. So the fact that in the end everything ends up with the Chief Justice of Pakistan when it comes to the matter of Supreme Judicial Council. Remember that before Supreme Judicial Council actually takes up a matter, it is the CJ who can actually hear admissibility of the matter, and since he does it, he can chair that committee even if it is a reference against him. So it is essentially the way our parliamentary system has evolved, the way repeatedly our democracy was starved, and the way our constitution was held in abeyance and patchwork quilt. That's how you ended up having a constitution which was supposed to actually empower the people, and which ended up creating an elitist state. One man at the top has all the powers, and you cannot even ask them. Similar questions are regarding the ability of a chief executive to dissolve assembly. I don't think that that should be a power that should be there without any due reasons, right? So all of this, if Parliament was in a quandary, if the Supreme Court of Pakistan faces some strange kind of situation, it is because of all of their contributions. This is one thing. Now let us talk about Maulana Fazlur Rahman's dharna as well, or his rally. Remember that I'm not a big fan of any huge gathering on the Constitution Avenue or D Chowk, because for 10 years, especially when Tahirul Qadri first came to Islamabad, and after that repeatedly other people came also. Pat came, then PTI, then TLP, then umpteen others. This kind of situation creates problems only for people like you and I, the self-made people, the common people who might not have health cover, who might not have accidental insurance, who don't have any kind of other recourse, physical recourse, if there is going to be any violence, right? So I'm not going to be a great fan of any kind of agitation of this sort, but did it work or did it not? Remember that in reasoning there's inductive logic reasoning, there's deductive reasoning, and then there's abductive reasoning. which also has duck test. If it looks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it is a duck. So what happened? The same Honorable Chief Justice and the bench that would take up a matter. Today something is filed and tomorrow they would constitute a bench and would start hearing everything and start issuing notices. All of a sudden had a hiatus of until 23rd in this case, right? Otherwise it was thought that perhaps they are going to actually issue some kind of contempt notices to the government or somebody else. So the problem with me is that at this moment, maybe in the case of blanket immunity given, I mean to Imran Khan, not only the cases that you are indicted in, not only the cases in which there has been a challan against you. If somebody is going to even imagine that you can be prosecuted, you have blanket immunity against all that. With that kind of a situation, the court, what is court telling me? It is telling me that if it comes to physical pressure, they do take it, right? And if there is no physical pressure, then the attitude is quite different. So whatever Maulana Fazlur Rahman was doing actually worked. Now, I don't know whether I have taken a lot of time, but I want to talk about Imran Khan Sahab and Army Act as well. I can wait for my turn next as well.
We'll just come back to you. Rana Sahab, you also wanted to add something earlier, so let's just go to that before I ask you another question.
I wanted to say a few words about this reference which is coming up. We have to see the legal aspect first of all. There are certain changes as far as Article 209 is concerned, as my brother has mentioned. Not necessarily that every reference will pass through the President. Anybody can send a petition or a reference against the Chief Justice to the Supreme Judicial Council, and that's to be taken up. They don't have the arbitrary powers to reject it. They have to give reasons. Without giving reasons, how can they reject that? And especially the parliamentary reference. This is not possible. Number two, the practicality of the issue is that once such a big step is being taken by the Parliament, do you think Parliament will be alone in this crusade or in this pursuit? All of the stakeholders will be putting their input, and then it will be decided. And if at all it is decided, I don't think it's indispensable. If at all it is decided it will pass through the President, the same President will have to recommend it.
Right, but Rana Sahab, I want you to qualify that a little bit more, because I want to understand what other avenue except the Parliament will be utilized and what other stakeholders will be involved in it, and how will you be able to convince the President to move ahead with this reference also?
I don't want to discuss these ways and means here. Okay. There are a lot many methods, because there is an urgency as far as the situation of the country necessitates this gesture, and President should participate into service of the nation to do something good for the nation.
But again, that's a should. Would he? Will he?
We will have to. We'll have to. Otherwise, he'll be said goodbye. No, nobody is indispensable.
But how do you plan to?
Both of us know that how.
Okay.
Okay, well,
all of us know.
That's going to be important, what course you're going to take and how that's going to impact us as well. But Rana Sahab, a little bit more with regards to the situation when it comes to the PTI chairman as well and the Parliament and the judiciary. It's not just about what the current scenario is or what, of course, the issues that have been raised in the Parliament today with regards to the PTI chairman. This has been going on for quite some time now, and we've seen that many directives of the Supreme Court have been rejected by the Parliament, and they haven't really gone through. In terms of how you would like to proceed from today onwards to what the ruling elite has been speaking about with regards to elections, is there any possibility of respecting any particular order that comes out of the Supreme Court, for example, the ECP's plea petition and the result of that, and then also with regards to this emphasis on dialogue? Again, you were drawing parallels earlier with terrorists, and they've been drawn before as well with regards to the PTI, but how is it then that you'll be able to come on the negotiating table with the same party? I
don't know. I can't say anything at this stage, because as far as consistent behavior of the PTI leadership is concerned, they are very unyielding, and they are not understanding the situation at all. They only know how to go for slanderous language and provocative language. This is what they have been doing, and they do nowadays even. They are not realizing the gravity of the situation. Now, Mr. Pitafi has indicated about the trial of the case under Army Act. If that is decided as it was discussed today in the Corps Commanders meeting, and there is a communique on that, then what? And if the cases are properly investigated, do you think the PTA leadership can be absolved? And not only the PTA leadership, a little bit above that, because if you are directly or indirectly helping a setup who are for terrorism, so what is it? It's abetting terrorism, irrespective of the sanctity of the offices. They owe an explanation to the nation. Why are they helping such people? How can they justify this out of the way and illegal help? Absolutely, blatantly illegal help. A man is on remand. How can you say set him free? Is it possible? So this is misuse of authority, which is not appropriate for such a high echelons of our judicial system.
Right, absolutely. Barrister Shabbir, of course, I'd like to hear your thoughts again on what has been discussed with regards to the reference, but I'm going to add two more questions to it. One, with regards to the discussion around the review petition of the ECP and the claim that no new points can be raised. Earlier, of course, there were issues of funds and security concerns that were spoken about, and now, of course, it's a matter of court's jurisdictions. Is this going to be entertained further within the petition? And secondly, with regards to putting responsibility with reference to the miscreants or the protesters who have damaged buildings and targeted institutions. Earlier it seemed that the PTI chairman was absolving himself of all responsibility, claiming also that he was unaware, or the fact that his party is not involved. Of course, the investigation will point out to whatever or whoever is involved, but in terms of how the situation was as part of a crowd or as part of a reaction to an arrest, in such cases, how do you actually put responsibility, and what are the nuances that are involved?
Before I come back to the two questions that you asked, I must compliment you on being very fair. You had put Rana Saab on spot, but still we don't know as to how the president and what can compel the president to send a reference which he in his own discretion thinks that is not made out. You see, the key difference, this point was debated before the Honorable Supreme Court when Justice Qazi Faiz Isa's reference was argued. So the question was that under Article 48 of the Constitution, 48(1), the President is bound to act on the advice of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. But under 48(2), the President has an absolute discretion to act in matters where the Constitution grants the President the discretion. And what was decided was that in matters of reference, it is the President's discretion. Therefore, even if the Parliament or the Cabinet were to send an advice to the President, it would not be binding on the President. So that is one point. The other point was, which also requires clarification, which is that these are two separate matters. That's why the Constitution specifically empowers the Supreme Judicial Council and the President of Pakistan, only two authorities under the Constitution. When they send a reference, it is obligatory on the SGC to inquire. It has no other option. It must start proceedings. It must inquire. But if you and I were to send a reference or to send a complaint, they can still decide not to look into it. So there are 500 complaints already pending. Therefore, before it could be sensationalized that the Parliament has decided, it would still not be obligatory on the SGC. However, yes, I do agree that the moral obligation of the Honorable Chief Justice and also the SJC would be that in such a case, if the Parliament has decided, it should be looked into. It should be inquired as to whether or not an actual case of misconduct has been made out. You were mentioning also on the content of what was discussed in the Parliament. Naturally, there is the other side, which you cannot sweep away. The other side's case is that never in history before an accused has been dealt with in such a manner where the apex court welcomes you. Yes, I completely agree that this is not how an accused should be welcomed. To that extent, I am completely in agreement with the objection which is being taken to. But I would also be failing in my duty if I were not to point out that the relief which he has been given is something which I myself, as a constitutional lawyer, any other politician, including Rana Saab for that matter, or any other analyst, we've been advocating for it. We've been saying 3-4 things. That one, you are presumed to be innocent until found guilty. We've been saying that even in post-arrest matters, bail should be given straight away. Number 3, that expeditious justice should be done. And number 4, political victimization. Under the garb of political victimization, NAP should not make such arrests. So which one of the principles have been violated? None of them. Merely because it hasn't happened before or other leaders have been deprived doesn't mean we would not welcome such a change. So I want to maintain my opinion that it is not as if some illegal relief has been granted. It is something which I and everyone else have been advocating for the past 4 years. Yes, PTI should take responsibility that in their own tenure, these fundamental rights were blatantly violated. Blatantly violated. So yes, they should make a statement, but again, 2 wrongs don't make a right. So I don't know if I've overspoken my time, but if we still have time, I can come back to your questions. But of course, subject to what Farrukh Saab has to say, because I may have eaten up his time.
Come back to you with the 2 questions and perhaps more. Farrukh, what you were wanting to say earlier, please add to that as well. But in terms of what we're discussing, especially with reference to the PTI chairman, this is something that is talked about often with regards to relief being given to him in the number of cases, and then also with regards to how the courts have been partial towards him. In terms of what the parliament, the issues that the parliament is bringing, do you think that there is something that can be challenged in a legal way in terms of what the benches have done or proceeded with the cases, or is it just the manner in which the CJP has behaved?
Right, Sana, regarding the reference or the complaints of the parliament, they have been actually piling up. There have been many complaints regarding a difference of the way one party was treated and the way the other was not. And that has been consistently going on. Even though I think that in the past also our courts have given certain people extraordinary leeway, but this time it seems that no matter what you do, I understand that there are many frivolous cases that might have been registered, but this case that was there, and I totally disagree with Barrister Saab that you know, it was unique incident. Actually, I thought ended up actually conflating 2 things. But let me very quickly talk about other analysts that have been talking about it. That the way, the cruelty with which Imran Khan Sahab was arraigned, nobody else was, right? I remember last time somebody in front of me actually spoke loudly in front of a court, and they were actually apprehended in the case of contempt of court. And this gentleman, the former Prime Minister, actually goes to various places with his, you know, entourage and all those supporters, and they actually vandalize places, right? And the court doesn't seem to take up the matter. And whenever a case is filed, some superior court actually becomes one window operation and starts actually giving concessions like nothing else. I understand that Barrister Saab must have actually been arguing for 4 or 5 years my right to be produced before a court in a Mercedes, a private Mercedes, when I'm actually apprehended by the court, and then the way the court actually gives me blanket, you know, concessions. I'm grateful if he thinks that I'm worthy of that. But my humble submission is that this is not a conduct of court that should be appreciated. The courts are respected because what they do, not because something is written somewhere or somebody is asked that you have to show respect. Unfortunately, that is the case that I've been actually talking about. Honestly, this whole idea of Supreme Court struggling is something that it has itself created. If it actually brings together all the, the entire bench, 15-member bench, full bench, I think that all these negative speculations about judiciary will be taken care of within no time at all. Now, let me talk about Imran Khan Sahab and this talk of Army Act. I have seen the statement coming from ISPR, but I don't think that it essentially applies to everyone that was out that day. Remember that you have to actually focus on a nuance, and that is there were, of course, peaceful protesters as well, but there were violent people who actually went out and attacked not only military installations, but various other buildings as well, and people too. And there is a context here, Sana. 1 year ago, when Imran Khan Sahab was removed from power, at that time also, there was this insinuation that there can be, because Imran Khan is very popular, and he might have some support within the army as well. So if he is pushed out, there will be some kind of, coup against the military leadership, right? This was the premise that was sold to us. Repeatedly, PTI leaders kept on saying that there can be a civil war. And I think that day, the way they actually attacked these installations, the purpose was simple. That Corps Commander's house will be attacked and army will be forced to react. And if some people die, they will take the bodies and sit for a sit-in. And after that, there would be some kind of reaction from within the army. It was actually a soft coup attempt, and that failed. So army is going to react, you know that. All over the world, whenever military installations are attacked, I'm talking even about India, I'm talking about many other countries like the US, there is always a reaction which is very stern. Regarding Imran Khan Sahab, media keeps on projecting him as somebody who's getting more and more powerful. Now that is a problem of perspective. I think that his case is that of Icarus, the guy who actually flew too close to the sun, wearing wax and feather wings, which melted and then he fell, right? When he was falling, many people, especially our intellectuals, when they actually looked at him, must have thought that there is a guy who has it together and he's still flying. But then he crashed. I think whatever happened on May 9 is going to have such consequences, Sana, that you will keep on thinking about it. Army Act, the talk of martial law, the talk of all these, various actions, these are short games. I don't think that there is going to be such a simple solution, because of course there is popularity, and then you have to differentiate between the so-called popularity and the so-called coup attempt or violence, perpetuation. And that will happen in the end. I know that Imran Khan Sahab is going to go behind the bars one day, but I assure you, by the time he makes it there, he will not be popular. One final thing, regarding the case in which Imran Khan Sahab was given the concession. I think there are so many frivolous cases, but one case that is very clear is about, this trust that we keep on talking about, right? And this case should not have been, dealt with so lightly. Today, CJ has changed his language. It took Maulana Fazlur Rahman and his sit-in Islamabad to actually compel him to show empathy with national institutions which were attacked. I wish the day he was handing out all the concessions to Imran Khan, these things had happened then. I wish he would have seen it then. Then I would have thought that he is a guy who actually understands and who sees our misery and who can stand with us.
Right, and Rana Sahab, I also want to take your opinion with regards to the way that Farrukh has referred to the consequences of whatever has happened, what he also is calling a soft coup, in terms of the kind of actions and statements that we've been hearing coming in from the ISPR, particularly with regards to the Army Act as well. Are you in support of this way of proceeding with the kind of investigation or the people that are involved? Do you think that this is the right way forward?
Yes, that has to be, because as per law, in cases where the army personnel or army property or army machines, for example, weapons, are involved, there is always a law, a joint committee of inquiry is constituted. And the president of the committee has to be an army officer, and the stakeholders like police and other investigating agencies will be working with him. And after the investigation is finalized, and if there is substantial proof, according to the prosecution it's a strong proof, then it can be handed over to the army for trial. So that is yet to be decided. But all the same, you can't overlook such incidents, as Pitafi Sahab has rightly pointed out, because it's a black spot on the history of this country, rather the biggest black spot. We have not many black spots. The biggest black spots, and the way our people and the people who were brought from outside. You might remember Pitafi Sahab and SLARA, that committee in which the presentation was made by the ISA chief and the Army General Chief, Mr. Baj was also sitting, and they made a presentation about bringing the TTP around to have a rapprochement with them. And once they finished their presentation, there was a hue and cry with the legislators. They protested, what are you doing? It is not possible. They have already killed thousands of people, innocent people. How can they correct and reform themselves? But they stood to their guns, and they did not budge an inch. And finally, they decided to reach an rapprochement, and there was a farcical rapprochement they reached. About 5,000 terrorists, they were brought and got settled in KPK. The people who were punished twice with capital punishment were also released.
Jet black.
Jet black. So these are the quantum, the size of the threat which they have been responsible. And there were three persons mainly.
Right.
Mr. Imran Khan, Faiz Hamid, and Mr. Bajwa, despite the protest by the parliament.
Absolutely. We're short on time, Rana Sahab, so I'll just quickly go back to Barrister Shabbir. Barrister Shabbir, my earlier questions, and also please add to that your thought on the Army Act and that being used in this case.
You see, on the Army Act, I would like to say that it's a constitutional obligation of every citizen under Article 5 of the Constitution. Loyalty to the state and obedience to the Constitution and the law. Every citizen of Pakistan is obligated that they must follow the law, and especially when it comes to attacking our key installations, or for that matter in this case, this horrible incident which took place, there is absolutely no defense. I mean, this is something against which one cannot possibly give any justification. So there are no two ways about it. I mean, this is tantamount to attacking the solidarity of Pakistan. This is an attack on Pakistan. So I think strict action should be taken, and no leverage should be given in this case. There is a political aspect of the matter as well. You see, previously also, when the followers of PTI, and I'm no moral police, but if they have previously taken the law in their own hands, if they have misbehaved, or if they have misbehaved with any political leader, for example, I remember the incident in Medina, in the Haram, followers of PTI, they had called names to just on the name of politics. I mean, that was a horrible incident. And till present date, even after these incidents, we have not heard any leader, including Imran Khan, reprimanding their followers. So that is the need of the hour. Fine, you keep saying on one hand that where is the evidence? These were not PTI people, these were not our followers, but at the same time, you're not reprimanding them. You're not telling them that this is not what should be done. Instead, you're saying if I'm kept behind bars, such incidents are to take place. So I think that's the need of the hour, and he should be made to answer that why.
Thank you very much, Barrister Shabbir. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much, Rana Maqbool sahab, for joining us and being a part of the discussion as well. Thank you, Farrukh, for being part of the debate. Of course, there's much that still remains to be seen, but in terms of the way that we are going to proceed forward, again, this is going to be the debate where we're going to try and understand what's going on and bring you more news as it progresses. That's all that we have. We'll see you tomorrow.